Um, I want to introduce our speaker tonight, Sheila Kennedy, and I first met Sheila when I myself was an architecture student here at the School of Architecture at Columbia. My collaborator, Suen Yang, and I were working on what we thought could be a prototype for a breathing building skin. And Sheila was a crucial reference for us in that project because of her own work on embedding electronics in architectural surfaces. So Suen and I, as these students at Columbia, emailed Sheila out of the blue with no introduction from anyone super important, and we just asked for her advice. We told her about our project and asked for advice. And to our surprise, not only did Sheila email us back, but she invited us to visit her studio in Boston and talk with her and her team working on materials research there. A year or two later, Suen and I were working on a plywood framing system, a completely different project with completely different materials and systems. But again, a project by Sheila became a crucial reference for us. This time, it was her electroluminescent plywood desk. A few years ago, when I attended a conference about ubiquitous computing, which, as you probably know, is basically the idea that computers are becoming smaller, cheaper, and more networked, literally disappearing into the woodwork of our architecture. So what are we going to do about it? Well, Sheila was there presenting, but this time not so much about her own projects, which had been a reference for us in the past, but this time giving us an amazing historical framework for the use of electricity in buildings. A year or two later, we were working on a proposal for putting sensors and lighting in the East River, and we discovered Sheila's dazzling lighting effects on her design for the Manhattan Ferry terminal. So yet another area of exploration and another crucial reference for us by Sheila and her firm. Last spring, I started trying to find good examples of R&D, research and development in architecture. And I knew that American architecture schools generally did not have science-like laboratories where research could happen outside of classwork in a time frame longer than semester-long studios. I knew that large firms, at least in this country, were generally more interested in billable hours and kind of efficiently designing and constructing, publishing projects. But amazingly, there was this one medium-sized firm in Boston that had a robust, proven, and innovative model for long-term R&D, and of course it was Sheila's firm. Over the summer, this past summer, I was not even in this country, I was in Cambridge, England, talking to some students, not even architecture students, they were students in basically synthetic biology. And they're working on an incredible new technology for living bioluminescent lighting. And yet again, I found myself thinking about Sheila's projects and talking about them with these students. At this point, not so much for the technical innovation, which I had been admiring all along for several years, but this time for the social, cultural, and political dimensions of her portable light project. Of course, none of this should be that surprising to any of you. Sheila's firmly on everyone's radar in the field of architecture. She's a respected and inspiring force. Recent projects by her architecture firm, KVA, with her partner, Franco Violich, include the IBA Hamburg Soft House project in Germany, the law school at the University of Pennsylvania, Harvard University's Department of Film and Video, and the public ferry terminal at 34th Street in Manhattan. You also probably know the firm has won countless awards, not only for design, but for innovation and for public work. MATx, the firm's material research division, which Sheila directs, has developed designs and technology applications for companies such as DuPont, Siemens, Herman Miller, Saint-Gobain, BSF, Procter & Gamble, the North Face, and the United States Department of Energy. And of course, these designs have been exhibited and published worldwide, both within and outside of the field of architecture. So if you know this, which you probably do if you've been following contemporary architecture, and if you know Sheila's work, you know that the projects are incredibly elegant, sophisticated, visually compelling, technologically advanced, and in essence, sustainability redefining. But as a kind of last note, I wanted to just describe what is maybe most remarkable to me about Sheila, and that's her incredible integrity as an architect, as a teacher, and as a researcher. She is not only an inspiration and an important reference in her own work, but she's really an active and generous mentor for a new generation of young architects and young teachers. Sheila and her work basically kind of raised the bar in many ways. They're a challenge to all of us and what we think we know about architecture and architectural categories. The projects are not only digital but physical. They're not only building designs, but they're material research. And they're not only innovative in technology, but they're innovative in applications and their social and political dimensions. So on behalf of the school, I'd like to thank Sheila for being here at the school again, and for taking the time to share her latest thoughts with us. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for that very nice, very generous introduction, David. I appreciate it. So what I'd like to do actually is something a little bit different, since we're in a kind of intimate setting here amongst friends. I thought I would share with you some new projects, some of which really haven't been shown before here. The talk is called "The Appeal of the Real," and that's really not my title. With apologies to Christopher Grunenberg, who's a curator at the Tate, who wrote an article on our work with the same title. But now I'm kind of taking it up in a different way. So, what I want to do is give you a very quick kind of whirlwind tour of the material history of electricity in 3 parts. As this pertains to architecture, this is entirely subjective account of history, and at times semi-fictitious or not. You be the judge. So it's aberrant. It's totally idiosyncratic, and I'm just going to throw it in as a kind of series of looped thoughts, talking about electrical embodiment, the projects, and then mixing in some projects, electrical power in the building body, and then emergent energy and climate constituencies. So I'm going to begin. So this is going to go pretty quickly. 1820, a new electrical toy captures the attention of ladies in the European courts. It is a wooden box emblazoned with the words, "Electrocute yourself." 2 copper knobs protrude. When grasped in each hand, the body completes an electrical circuit, sending a mild electric shock through the body. 1880, there is no distinction in science between the phenomenon of electricity and the human body. The well-being or wellness of electrical energy is taken for granted. 1900, the invention of knob and tube wiring provides the necessary isolating break that's mandated for the incorporation of the electrical body in the cavity walls of architecture. 1920, a patent for BX cable is held, and the specific materiality of metal connectors, rubber connectors, woven connectors, and enablers facilitate the disappearance of electrical infrastructure, which enables it, ironically, to disappear within the body of the hollow wall. 1910, Scientific American reports on domestic electrification. Men and women assume a new position with respect to the wall and to the distribution of electrical power as a building surface. Interfaces crystallize around the junction box, the outlet, and the electrical actuator switch. These elements remain in place today. 1975, Kodak demonstrates organic light-emitting diodes. 1996, the blue phosphor is disclosed, enabling white light generated from flexible semiconductors. 2002, lighting and electrical power are theoretically liberating from conduits and wall cavities, the problem of their interfaces, their connectors, their material form and aesthetics. In short, the problem of electrical embodiment becomes a preoccupation for us at MATx. In the same year, 2002, in the Sargasso Sea, 10,000 new organic photoreceptors are found floating by a WHOI research team. We all shine on. The first project I'd like to talk about is a motion capture project that we did for the University of Pennsylvania. Now, you may be familiar with the kind of hybridization of digital flesh and human flesh that is enabled through motion capture photography. In this case, from Pandora, the kind of grafting of an ocean language of movement into a forest that kind of thickens the ambience, and then the distortion of the human body into the characteristics of the kind of tall, elongated knobby. So there's a kind of a fusion of a digitally constructed flesh and bodyhood upon the human body through the device of motion capture. So the question that we had in this project was, could we somehow invert this technology to give the wall a digitally constructed bodyhood, try to give the architectural surfaces of a public corridor system at the University of Pennsylvania School of Architecture a certain kind of physical thickness and a virtual thickness by playing with the surfaces. So as you know, mocap, motion capture, puts reflective markers on people. The camera in a 360 ring photographs that, synthesizes and integrates that movement via computation into an animation. And basically our project swings back and forth between the kind of typical darkened condition and a curtain which can open, allowing the same studio to be a kind of graduate workspace. So a fairly simple idea, moving that out into the public corridor and trying in some way to kind of carve out a body around some obstacles. This is an important intersection here. Todd and Billy Skurkanovich Hall is here. This is the main entry to the School of Engineering. So we began to insert very simple optical devices like mirrors to kind of suggest a virtual space, thickening some surfaces with introduction of reflectivity in mirrors, and also just making do with some very, very thin surfaces. This is a wall system which I'd like to talk about in some detail. This is about 1.5 inches of material surface. And so what we tried to do in the project is take the motion capture and invert that. So we have, instead of a body with reflectors, we start with the phenomenon, which is kind of pixelated points of light, which through software is integrated into the figure of a body, and then that figure of a body is revealed to be that of a person who has just walked down the corridor, captured with a motion sensor, and replayed on video. So when we were doing this project, of course, this is a permanent work of architecture at UPenn. I'd had to go through all the kind of warranties and all the kind of typical implementation strategies of architecture for a university. So we used this lighting product. This is a positive, negative data. Philips Lumiled, kind of typical LED cluster that comes on long strings. This is the kind of key detail, actually right here. It's kind of funny. If you were to read this note, I think you'd laugh, because the kind of enabling tools in this case are a wallpaper and a staple gun. So the question is, how do you arrange in a specific order multiple strands of the LEDs, getting the kind of density that we want with a kind of insertion of a conventional LCD screen, so that as the resolution gradually becomes a little bit higher, there's a moment when you get a kind of flash of high res and you actually see the figure of a person who's walked by. So using MIT's open software processing, we start with the figures walking, which are captured by a sensor in the hallway. Then that's transmitted to a kind of white, high contrast black-white ratio. And then the processing code begins to atomize this from a kind of higher condition of resolution to a lower condition of resolution as people go up and down this ramp. You can see the strategy then, the kind of idea of taking a plot of wallpaper and just with a staple gun, having the contractors just staple on top of the plot exactly where these LEDs strings need to be with their respective densities. And just a kind of a quick take at what that's like going through it. And the kind of depth that's produced by the actual material property of reflectivity, the flash of the LCD, and then the kind of virtual companion that's generated as a kind of memory of somebody who's just walked down the hall and forms a kind of companion for someone who is walking down the hall. This is an entirely different problematic. Here, instead of the kind of usual modern idea of the dissolution of architecture, the kind of dissolving of architecture when confronted with the digital media, here we actually tried to address thickness. So for the new law school building, we were confronted with a kind of context of material thickness. This is an urban fabric in an urban university in Philadelphia, in University City. And there was a desire on the part of the law school, as I'm sure you can understand, to kind of express in the building this substantiality of the body of law. So the kind of imperative for a representational project that had to do with weight, significance, and substantiality was a kind of a new thing for us. And the project actually revolved around a failed material idea. We had initially wanted to use alabaster as a masonry cladding that would dissolve in light, following the kind of earlier strain of thought. And instead, we found that not only would that dissolve in light, but that would also just dissolve in the atmosphere, the kind of gritty atmosphere of Philadelphia. It just isn't a material that's suitable for the freeze-thaw cycle of the Northeast. So instead, we had to work with marble, a quite fairly thick, 1.5-inch marble, and we devised a method using a kind of what we call a utility script process to make this appear, this marble, this solid piece of marble, appear to have an inner light. So the idea is pretty simple. You have standard large sheets of marble that appear to float on a brick cornice. And then with a reflector here, we can channel the light from any angle, 360, where the sun path is, and get a kind of a very bright reflected light on this upper band of floating marble. So to do this, we automated that process because, as you can imagine, really looking at the angles was difficult. So what's kind of interesting is that we're harnessing, even on the north facade, this light. So we're thinking about the section as a kind of a scaffolding that puts the materials in place in such a way that they can harvest light, natural light, in an artificial construction. So on the north, we get the kind of unusual effect of light that's reflected, so a northern sunlight, if you will. This is a large existing courtyard. This is our new building and a renovation that we're also doing in front of the main flagship building of University of Pennsylvania School of Law. So this is a courtyard. This is Sansom Street. And basically, the idea was very simple, that this is a wall building that steps down in sections so that southern light can come to the courtyard. And we had to kind of created a void here so that as you enter, you're kind of aware that this ground, more aware of the ground plane of the courtyard being a kind of a thing that exists, a plane that exists as a surface. So coming in, you begin to see the courtyard and the existing architecture, stairs going down. And looking back, Sansom Street in all of its kind of brick, the traditional row house brick materiality appears to float. And there's a reading of the kind of plane of the courtyard that comes through. So I want to focus a little bit on two strategies that we used, which bring together a kind of artificial materiality that engages the sun, a natural source, or a kind of an artificial animation of this like really heavy, weighty wall. So there's a basic play of rough and smooth in the threshold. You can imagine the building as a kind of a thick wall. The massing is in two parts with a surface that wraps around here and here. And I'd like to really talk about the kind of threshold piece and bear in mind that this is a very narrow street here, so that the diagonal view is super important. And this is the detail that we developed for the brick. So What we tried to do was to give this brick a, so I can get this to work. Or maybe it will come on. But we developed an animation that reproduced the kind of way in which people would approach it, and also did a number of kind of physical models exploring how the brick would be pixilated, and we're using a pattern, traditional pattern, Flemish bond with a header brick and a stretcher brick, and trying to kind of artificially roughen that. So at any rate, in the entry, there's an idea about a surface that's a single surface that begins to kind of break up into a series of marble panels. You can see they change position, and they kind of open a little bit like books and are stacked. So the effect of the transparency of this material changes. It appears to move as the sun moves, even though the material itself is static. So it's trying to kind of treat the wall assembly as a kind of an artificial device in section, in which to kind of harness over time the animating effect of the sun as that plays over that surface. We're doing all the working drawings, of course, for this project. The detail for how the standard stone panels clip onto this array here, the kind of three-dimensional stone entry piece. And then I think it's almost like looking at a kind of conventional perspective point like this one, points which we produced for the law school, shows us the kind of way in which you can't really capture this. This is just a flat bitmap. It's not the roughened brick. So it's very difficult to kind of capture the effects that we're looking for. And if you go to the UPenn Law School website, there's a web camera on construction, and we'll see soon enough what these effects are going to look like. The building's being topped off this November. The second historical loop is the electrical house, 1913. The French inventor George Knapp, master craftsman of 80 building trades, unveils to the public in 1913 the electric house, a 3-story dwelling he had single-handedly conceived and constructed over the course of 20 years. The electric house offered entirely new applications for electricity, specially arranged for the management of interior building services and domestic bourgeois life. Wiring and circuitry introduced the invisible force of electricity into the dwelling, where it was distributed through a sophisticated and diverse electromaterial set of interfaces. This was the first comprehensive electrically run building management system. It was designed to simplify the work of servants running with and within the house to make the dwelling a hygienic, agreeable, and marvelously comfortable abode. The electric house was appointed with heat-producing walls, cooling air misters, and a large inventory of robotic electromechanical furnishings, such as a form-changing bedside table, an electric armoire, a Lazy Susan dumbwaiter, shown here, that descended through the table down to the kitchen below. These apparatuses were commanded by voice through the interlocutor of a ceiling lamp, which concealed an integrated open mic system, which was always on, permitting the owners to eavesdrop and overhear any conversation within the house. Among the many marvels of the electric house, none was considered by visitors to be more astounding than the electrified winter garden, which was heated in the cold months by underground electrical resistor wires. The garden, with its mounds of perennially blooming flowers, produced vegetation of a size, lushness, and vividness, with a vividness of color that was unprecedented in nature. The electric house failed to achieve the commercial success that George and Knapp had anticipated. What would these ideas, if recovered and developed differently, have produced? Would this have anticipated a banal and totalized embedment of electrical apparatus in the bourgeois house, the erasure of architecture potentials by demurring to an invisible infrastructure, another disappearing act? Or would such ideas produce a kind of double agent, stealthily complying with the bourgeois expectations while also radicalizing and perhaps transforming the electrical materiality of the house, a set of semi-autonomous elements operating as a kind of paradigm for distributed building services? The next set of projects addresses this strand of thinking around electrical infrastructure in the electrical house. This is the Conveyor building system that we developed for Herman Miller. You can check it out, and you can also specify it if you like at www.conveyor.com. We were kind of given the brief by Herman Miller to produce a new building system that could in effect mitigate the trash that's generated, the construction trash that's generated by the constant churn of tenants and the constant churn of open office space when new projects come about and partitions need to be changed and rearranged and all of their electrical infrastructure needs to be ripped out. So over 35% of all drywall in the United States is trashed in this way and thrown into landfills. So the Conveyor system is basically a ceiling track, which you see here, with a 6-bus bar proprietary system, which we developed along with Applied Minds, software engineers in LA. And through an IR interface not dissimilar to this, you can take any electrical actuator, anything that has an electrical motor, be that a piece of HVAC infrastructure, a computer, a light, an LED, and reconfigure it very quickly, and then assign that to a switch so you can reconfigure space. And you can also disassociate electrical equipment. So for the first time, you can begin to configure space by thinking about electrical actuators and sensors, electrical motors and switches, like digital objects, like digital furniture that you can move around. And this, I'm sorry, the screen resolution is not so great here, but this was tested at Harvard University in room 109, where it is today. And this is my friend Scott taking the ceiling system, which can be shipped flat in a FedEx box, and just expanded into the ceiling in this way. So we started by defining the surfaces, setting parameters for the depth, cutting out a solid, making essentially a Boolean cut in this, and then using the DTI flying jib laser cutter to very rapidly cut the flat forms out of a very affordable PET material. So for example, this profile right here nests into that, so there's very, very, very little waste, almost zero waste. The tabs and the holes that the laser cutter cuts are in fact waste. But if you're going to integrate an LED system, and this is the first American patented LED ceiling system, then you need to make everything else super affordable. And so you can go from a kind of very conventional lecture room to a distance learning setting to kind of a student lounge or a kind of a relaxation space. And this person's feet you can see right here. So all of these are kind of scene sets that can be selected and customized very, very quickly with the Conveyor system. And we also began to think about the partitions themselves then. If they were freed up from electrical infrastructure, what could happen with them? And this sort of spawned a set of investigations that we did with Conveyor. You can see Conveyor here, basically figuring out a way to reconceive of the structure of the wall and dress it with a series of skins that could be applied on with Velcro and reclad and removed very easily. And these are some images of prototypes of that system. Here, James is actually plugged into this textile, getting low voltage current, getting some light and some daylight. Different examples of that using a puffed air in a Rachel 3D knit textile that's actually used as a cattle mattress, so kind of transforming the purpose of that. The Conveyor smart building system then evolved into the East River Ferry project, where we tried to take what we had learned about infrastructure in the ceiling and rethink that in terms of a public project, in terms of the depth of this canopy. This is the East 34th Street Pier. This project is actually under construction after quite some time, so we're pretty excited about that. The structure is done by Michael Stein in collaboration with KVA MATx, and Michael has really helped us find a way to make a very, very thin structure. And the main problem is actually keeping the building from kind of kiting up in the air. Basically, the idea of this project is that up and down the East River, there are a set of ferry boat terminals. And we tried to take advantage of an existing saturated network, a digital network, which exists on Staten Island, which is the U.S. Coast Guard system. So this has been in place since World War II, and it's essentially really underused. So we tried to reappropriate that as a kind of center for real-time passenger messaging and internet access for these sites up and down the East River. This is the basic section with a kind of very large cutout here that lets light from one edge of the canopy to the other. And what we're using is a metal spluttered Versailles material that harvests a kind of a caustic net effect that you see here, which is a refractive effect off the water. And the building itself is got a series of atomized building services, heat-on-demand benches, and so forth that are now being constructed. And you can see the kind of play of that, or you could see the play of this. I'm sorry, the resolution on your screen is not good, but from the water, the kind of caustic net plays against the surface, and these very large openings permit daylight. And they're soft openings. We have soft doors, soft zippers, an entire kind of fitted bodice system of fabric parts for each of these large 3 fabric skylights. And so we're interested in applying solid state lighting, and we have a ring of lighting around this. So by day, this kind of exists like a void, the skylight, and at night that void condition is kind of inverted into a volume. This is what the terminal will look like, around this time of year when you're commuting late in the afternoon up and down the East River or coming in from LaGuardia Airport. Trying to kind of correct the kind of proportions of this long, thin thing by allowing a virtual reflection to exist in relationship to the canopy. This next project is a project that we did, a competition project for Yaosu Expo. It is in Korea, in southern Korea, in a part of Korea that has a very important marine preserve, and the theme of the expo was ocean, living ocean, and actually there was a large aquarium pavilion that was awarded by Emergent architecture in this competition. So the site presented a number of kind of interesting contradictions about the ocean, which we wanted to engage. Contradictions that had to do with kind of killing something that you love, loving something so much you kind of kill it. So what was proposed was to kind of encircle, or what had been beginning to happen is that these islands, there's a lot of tourism and scenic ocean islands here that are on the edge of the marine reserve. So by encircling this, the water becomes quite stagnant here, and that would be further exacerbated with the cruise terminal that's being planned here. So the pavilion by Emergent is to go here, and our competition project is for the reuse of these industrial silos, because in fact the Yaesu city is, as some of you may know, is really a kind of a transitional city. It wants to be a gateway to the marine reserve, but it really is coming from a pretty straightforward industrial path. So our approach to this was, and the idea was to try to keep the silo as much as possible. This is sort of more like an installation and a counterpoint to this kind of large thematic aquarium pavilion that's planned here. So our idea was to try to connect to the living ocean with the Argo Array. And the Argo Array is a set of floating buoys that primarily are underneath the water surface. They pop up and then send a signal by satellite, and then they drop down again. And so they chart ocean currents, salinity, and temperature kind of by where they're not. So charting them in the network is always a kind of it's an ad hoc network, so it's always a kind of an aberrant condition, the distance from one sighting to another. So the project that we developed was called Ocean in Sight, and the kind of first thing that we did was just lift the ocean in two ways. We actually had water that would fall, and we had a net that was connected to the Argo Array, data from the Argo Array here. And so from the train station, there was no view of the ocean. From the main plaza, there was no view of the ocean. So instead, you would see the actual water, and you would have some understanding of what was happening underneath the surface of the water. So the proposal was to recycle the ocean water from the harbor that was becoming stagnant, to raise it via a solar pump, to let it reoxygenate and flow out through a series of chambers and tidal pools here. So mostly the silos were kept empty, and we use them for gravity. There was a small bar proposed here, and then the LED net for the Argo. We imagined that there could be a single strand of kelp that would be like some 120 feet tall that could float, and that the caustic light effect would begin to come from the top down. So this is a view from this looking out over the islands, and you'd have to kind of imagine the interruption here and there of these buoys as they drift and kind of emerge back into the surface. This was the idea that we were interested in this project. So materially then, this is a surface of perforated metal that conjoins the two silos that you can see. There's a stair path inside and an elevator that takes one up to the bar and the observation deck. This is the LED net. And we wanted to take a look at how this could be reading as a kind of an unfolded surface that could be then wrapped around the various different data that would come from the network of flowing buoys that were already in place in the marine reserve and beyond in the ocean. Salinity, temperature, all of these kinds of graphics would be translated into the materiality of that project. So over time, this could become more elaborate, containing a different kind of water recycling and different kinds of water effects that could be experienced in a kind of omni-theater where you would rise up and enter into the giant kelp tank here. So our idea was very simple, that we would take the network of these buoys and that we would connect it to an LED net, and that would in fact be the way of demonstrating the kind of livinghood of the ocean. And so what we kind of liked about this is that every single house has its own little water tank, all these like blue things here. And so this operates as a kind of a collective signal to make visible what you normally wouldn't see underneath the surface of the ocean. Okay. The last little loop here has to do with the Emergent energy climate matrix. So 1880, Sir William Herschel, an astronomer, discovers the infrared spectrum. 1884, energy is described by the scientist Liebig as a matrix of distinct forces such as light, electricity, magnetism that could be measured in terms of work. In the next decade, this work begins to be defined as the production of a physical change, and a new meaning was ascribed to energy as the cause of that physical change. Energy, which was formally understood for the rest of its history prior to 1844 as in terms of work or force, is redefined as something that individuals and societies need to implement that physical change, something that is therefore of value for industrialized society, thought of as something that's scarce or something that's a resource. This definition of energy, barely 150 years old, is the one that continues to manifest itself in the discourse of architecture today. Instead of being abundant, natural, and ongoing, energy, which is a medium of naturally occurring exchanges, has taken on this new kind of recent socially constructed definition. Can the older term be revived as a catalyst to a new way of thinking about energy and climate? Energy as a law of nature, or as embedded in the kind of fundamental matrix or network of nature. To enter a disciplinary discourse, the materiality of electrical energy must be represented. It must be seeable. 1950, the single element detectors or line image infrared scanners were developed. In 1970, Philips developed the pyroelectric tube, and the first thermal Navy imager was used by the Royal British Navy on board ship. So for the first time, there was a possibility of seeing these naturally occurring effects of energy, seeing heat and understanding that as energy. And as soon as we could see the heat that was wasted, we began to form some idea about efficiency or inefficiency of energy. We began to form some kind of reconstitution of energy in the body and the kind of natural set of exchanges between a device like a computer, any source of heat, and the body. In 1978, Raytheon first demonstrated the technology to the military. In the late 1980s, the federal government awarded the high-density array development contracts to Raytheon and Honeywell for the development of thermal imaging technology for practical military applications, which in the time of the Gulf War became very evident, and you may remember the use of night vision or thermal vision to identify targets and to show the pathway of rockets. So heat, seeing waste as energy, and mining architecture as a site for abundant, latent, distributed forms of energy. In 1978, coincidentally the same time, in the town I grew up, Woods Hole, this is John Sockwell developing the first floating buoy device in the antenna while his shipboard cat watches on. This is the deployment of the array of ocean-going buoys that are floating even now in this ad hoc array. And so for the first time in 2009, when Google launched Google Underseas, you have not only the kind of heat or atmospheric dissipation of energy, but you also have the kind of idea of what's going on in the big mass of water, which is in fact really impacting the climate. So the last couple of projects I'd like to talk about addresses this idea of a network of many small disparate things and tries to mine that. This is a portable light project, which you can check out at www.portablelight.org. It's a nonprofit that we spun out of our office in 2005. It's now a pretty significant endeavor in its own right, and there are a lot of people who are participating in it. The idea is that there can be a new medium, a new flexible medium for the delivery of portable power and light. And so we're taking flexible semiconductor materials, flexible PV cells, and trying to use them as a replacement for fire as light, and developing a kit, which is basically called the portable light kit, which consists of a soft optic reflector, which I'll talk about in a minute, a circuitry control panel that we've developed and that we're now respinning, I hope one near final time, and then either 2 or 4 watts of flexible array. So this is a very simple kit, but the point is that it can be adapted. So we're trying to look at a delivery method that involves design kind of globally by appropriating existing facsimile communications, and locally by creating a kit that can be integrated into any set of materials. So basically, as this young woman, Alina, is demonstrating, when we have a completely flat textile, something that can be mass manufactured, we can, in RhinoScript, set up a vector, a surface normal vector definition, where we can look at the parabolic reflection. We can create a pattern for that. We can then create a kit. And Alina is demonstrating that from this flat to folded form, you can kind of pop up and have a kind of a portable studio, if you will, a portable workshop. So the first generation of portable light really just was light. In the next generation, we've developed a USB protocol which can charge cell phones. So light kind of collapses. It actually kind of expands the hours of the day, I guess you could say, because normally you wouldn't have light since this is artificial light. So it's an asynchronous soaking up of the sun, storing it in a cell phone battery, and then allowing that to be used at night. And it kind of collapses space with the connectivity of the cell phone. And you may be aware that there's just a hugely significant number of new cell phone subscribers, 1,000 new cell phone subscribers per minute in 2010, Most of those people are in Africa, Southeast Asia, and some parts of South America. So we had developed this kit, and we were approached by local women who asked us whether, this is in Mexico, the first pilot project, who asked us whether we could give them, let them, help them essentially develop the optics so that they could integrate that into the kitsuri, which are these traditional bags that are woven by the Wixárika people in Mexico. These are some of the kinds of hybridic nanotechnology and backstrap loom woven artifacts that the master weavers produced. And this is the kind of pop-up soft optics element that fits inside a bag like this that we would develop. So there's a whole set of profiles that are now beginning to emerge, where the kit of parts, the bag in this case, but the three essential parts, the circuitry, and then the addition of a cell phone, are beginning to actually kind of change the profile of what people do. And so if someone uses a tool, and then if you have a kind of user, a consumer producer, like Estella is here, then the kind of next collection of energy entrepreneurs has the potential to be a kind of constituency. And that's what we've seen happening. We just completed a really large project with Massachusetts General Hospital and Zinni Tebethele, who's a National Geographic young explorer. And Zinni had the idea of integrating the portable light kit seen here into a hospital blanket so that patients who have multi-drug resistant TB and HIV could sit outside in the sun and collect some energy. They could literally empower themselves. And in South Africa, you can receive unlimited amount of text messages for free. You only get charged when you reply. So there's a call center that Zinni and Dr. Krista Dong and her team at iTeach set up that's now referring something like 500,000 calls per month, reminding people to take their prompting people via cell phone to take their medication, and the cell phone is being charged with a portable light kit. I'm just going to go through a few of these. This is in Haiti now, working with Maison de la Naissance, which is a very interesting, very innovative, kind of grassroots up healthcare provider that uses the internet to organize activities. So we developed a bag, a messenger bag with a flap on it and a 2-watt panel. And women can travel in the rural areas of Haiti using the USB for devices such as a neonatal monitor, a pulse oximeter, battery charger, various different small medical devices that can plug into that. And then another project that we're doing with the Clinton Global Initiative and Paso Pacifico, an NGO in Nicaragua, is the idea of kind of an environmental educator and ranger team. So they developed, the campesinas there developed their own bag, this time using 4 watts, a variety of different cell phone related peripherals that they provide that allow them to charge by day as they patrol the beaches and protect the beaches, in this case, particularly the sea turtle eggs. So the way that it works is that this is a sustainable business venture for people who would otherwise be poachers. They get paid quite a lot of money by, basically by you and anyone who donates to Wildlife International and Conservation International. So it's a pretty good livelihood because it allows people who know the edge of the ocean and the beach very well to actually become the kind of dozens of this. And in order to address the problems of the ocean and the land where these meet, we're going to need lots and lots of points of data. It can't all be remote robotic buoys. Human constituency networks are also going to need to be involved. So we do this all through fax. We use our computers right in our studio. We run the definitions on the ray tracing to get the best optical patterns. We flatten that out. We send that by fax anywhere where there's a fax. The pattern comes out, and then the reflector is locally made and produced. This is the last project I'll show you. Just thought you might be interested. This is Eric Hersmann's project at Ushahidi. Ushahidi is like the top most read blog in Africa. You should check it out. And so Eric took the flat bag to Nairobi and basically worked with middle-class business people who began to design their own kind of energy harvesting bags, messenger bags, and equipment. So what we did is we developed the idea of the flat bag as a messenger bag with a detachable flap that became a kind of transformable object. So you'll see this, I think, in a minute. My colleague here, MATx, Charles Garcia, is demonstrating this. So pretty soon he's going to rip off that flap and throw away the messenger bag. There it goes. And this video is kind of pure Charles, just demonstrating, I guess, the durability and flexibility of this new kind of material form for infrastructure. Yeah, he's going to beat it around for a while, and when he gets tired of doing that, I think he ends up setting it up as a lamp, and that's the flat bag, flexible light and power. So again, check us out at www.portablelight.org if you're interested. And the last project I want to talk about is our soft house, where there is more information on our website. And here we tried to take the lessons learned from Portable Light and begin to try to apply them to problems, back here at home in the so-called first world. So we took a typical household curtain that moves horizontally on a track, and we proposed that that curtain do everything that a traditional curtain does, plus harvest energy, and that the curtain track also be a distributing vehicle for all this low voltage DC power, your camera, PDA, laptop, solid state lighting, Prius car battery, etc. All of those things which are generating heat when we try to run them off of AC could be run very efficiently from a low voltage DC curtain. So we made many, many prototypes. We looked at many different flavors of PV in this curtain, and we are now working with a textile manufacturer in Sweden to develop this for the IBA Hamburg project. And as you might know, there are two systems. One is the horizontal track system that I showed you that moves from east to west. The other one is a vertical curtain. We developed a way to kind of densify the amount of PV depending on budget and orientation. You can see the large vertical curtain here and here. And then what became interesting was the kind of positions that people could get themselves in as they kind of chase this curtain around various different phases of harvesting energy, giving off energy, and enclosing space. So we were fortunate enough to win the IBA Hamburg competition. This is the International Baustelling of 2010 with a proposal for soft house. And Hamburg is an odd climate. This is Wilhelmsburg Island. It's the largest island in the Elbe. It's a very low light, so there's a very kind of pale, yellow light that we were trying to capture artificially and kind of artificially reconstruct that natural effect and pull it into the house, because it gets pretty dark there because of the latitude. So the proposal for IBA Hamburg is to do a very large urban intervention with a neighborhood of soft houses here. You can see that here. There's an S-Bahn that runs through, which is the only infrastructure, but this is the largest island in the Elbe River. Those of you who are familiar, this is the Hafen City, the Herzogenbuurtmal Opera House is there. So there's been a lot of development in Hamburg, and this is a pretty ambitious project, and there's more information on the web if you're interested in that. So what we tried to do was to add a little bit to our repertoire and to kind of take an extremely old thermal idea, the idea of the tapestry, and kind of reconfigure that with metallic material that could reflect heat. So in a radiant floor condition, as you kind of can see here, when you curl up a curtain, when you take it away from a window and begin to kind of make space with it, you can create very local microclimates because there's radiant heating and cooling from the groundwater source that comes in through the floor. So we wanted to kind of configure that. So this is the basic premise of the project. It's a series of row houses with a soft covering that harvests energy and also reflects daylight, and then a set of curtains that are movable that bring the artificial light deep into the row house. This is maybe a better view of that. The energy harvesting component here, various different curtains that run on tracks that can be reconfigured in a very simple Brettstapfel-like box. Brettstapfel is an all-wood construction. It's kind of a traditional Northern European construction that sequesters a lot of carbon. This had to meet very rigorous German standards, DIN standards, for sustainability. So the basic premise of what we're working on here is that there are piezo wind sensors that are arrayed along the roof because it's pretty windy in Hamburg. We again use processing, MIT's processing software, and we pull that down to a laptop and also a mobile platform and develop in this a way to visualize energy and also to finely control the artificial atmosphere, the kind of interior weather in this project. So take a look, you can kind of understand that you can have the equivalent of a visual breeze as the wind blows. There's a kind of a program setting that allows the wind to be visually represented blowing through the curtains, even though the curtains are still because you're enclosed in an interior weather condition. So in KVA now, this is a recent video with Patricia Gruitz testing a prototype. This is the computer interface with processing. It's a little energy visualization dashboard. You can't see it very well here, but she's basically, showing the way in which we have this kind of very fine ability to control the LEDs and to kind of quantify how much energy and how much money is being saved through the energy dashboard. This is just a quick last look at what that's like as that begins to twist open. You get this kind of bounce or flash of light. These can be controlled with marine winches, or they can be put on an automated setting. And a view of the proposed project, which is going to be built, we learned, and so it should be realized by 2012. So thank you very much. This is my end of my talk. I don't know what you all do here. Do you do the questions thing?
Yeah.
You do? Okay. All right. Yes, hi.
Hi, I'm interested in the weatherability of the screens, like, for this last project, and you've shown it in other projects. I mean, like, how does it do with water and varying temperatures?
We're using a new material that's made by our partner Global Solar for this project. So it's a new CIGS PV, a third generation PV. So it's relatively efficient for a thin film photovoltaic. But it's made in a really continuous roll-to-roll process, so it's extremely low in embodied energy. It has a 20-year warranty, so it's a fairly rugged material. The big weakness of all of the thin film electronics is what's called the barrier or the encapsulation, and they've developed a better barrier, but I still think that there's work to be done. On portable light, though, we've developed a system where people can just damp sponge the panels. So.
It's good to start somewhere, so it's great.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about it. Yes.
I feel like architecture has traditionally been sort of a medium that's very stable and static and unchanging, in part because a lot of the people who commission architecture were rich enough to afford architects. So I'm wondering how your adaptive architecture could expand participation in architectural culture and the ability to change one's environment to a wider range of audiences, since a flexible building is cheaper and easier to change.
That's an interesting question / observation. If you see any of those rich people, please send them our way. I don't know if you've noticed, but we're in the middle of a giant recession, and a lot of our work is public. So when you work for a public university like UPenn or something, it's not exactly a collection of rich people. But I take your point, and I think that the notion of adaptability is kind of central to a rethinking of the SOFT project that, for example, Negroponte initiated at MIT in the mid-'70s. So SOFT Project 2.0, how can we take advantage of some of the new capabilities of infrastructure and create an architecture that it gives, within certain parameters, a greater degree of adaptability. so that we can think about a kind of culturally constructed, culturally adaptable technology, as opposed to a technology that exists, pro facto, that you just have to use it and get modern, or don't use it. So we are definitely interested in that question. Yes. The project that we did with the Clinton Global Initiative was primarily executed by our partner, an NGO called Paso Pacifico, and Dr. Sarah Otterstrom, who's in charge of Paso Pacifico. So portable light is now a resource, and many NGOs are operating their own portable light projects. So I just want to make that very clear, that this is expanding and it has a life of its own. So with the Clinton Global Initiative and Paso Pacifico made a commitment to involve women and girls in the training as conservation rangers for the beaches. So by day, the energy is generated as people patrol the beach, and then at night, they can count turtle eggs, they can look out for poachers, and back at home, the women can use the light for myriad chores which they have to do, but also for education at home, which is their kids' education and also their own education as environmentalists, and also as people who are building businesses in ecotourism in that part of Nicaragua. Other questions? Comments? Yes. You can just, I think we can.
What your position, if anything, in advocating for smart grid technology in terms of people being able to, if they're being able to collect this energy with a DC system, they can feed it back into the system, and your architecture could be not only money saving but money making. So
yes, I think that in Germany that's definitely possible, where there are incentives and you could make money. Your curtains could make money for you by taking energy that's harvested and putting it back on the grid. Like the last time, my upholstery made money for me was when I found like 2 quarters in back of my couch during one of the rare occasions when I was like cleaning my house. But I like the idea of upholstery making money, and I think that that is an idea that has captured people's imaginations. The reality in the United States is slightly different. In the United States, I think, and maybe this is changing in Europe too, with the kind of crisis of the euro and the collapse of those incentives, the notion of some local power and being able to store local power is taking on a greater degree of importance, because the smart grid is a long time coming. And so you obviously can't, put the infrastructure on hold while you develop the smart grid and then turn it on. So from a kind of practical standpoint, and a lot of our work is about prototyping and putting demonstration projects out there, we needed to find a way out of the box to work. So we've looked very closely at tailoring loads, like the DC electrical loads, to capacity, so that we have something that's out of the box, ready to go, that doesn't have to rely on a future smart grid. And you asked me about my position about the smart grid, which I hope I tried to answer there. But I will say that, I was listening in on a class before the talk here, and probably the professor is sitting right here, and I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. So whether it's at Columbia or whether it's at MIT or the GSD, there's a tendency to still talk about technology in kind of really progressive, modern ways, like it's autonomous, it's new, it's always a revolution, and it's going to change the world, And in this talk, what I've tried to do is kind of put the brakes on that and to try to say it's old, it's going to change some things, but other things will remain the same, but we can do it now. And that, I think, is the practice for all of your, that's the potential of the practice of all of your generation. There is a translucent organic photovoltaic that Konarka has been trying to develop, But in general, to absorb to absorb UV, to absorb the energy part below 350 or whatever in the spectrum, you need a dark material. So what we're trying to do is accept the materiality of the new infrastructure, whether that be the kind of super bright point source that needs to be mitigated with a reflector, or whether that be the kind of quality and blueness or darkness of the PV. We're trying to accept that and kind of reposition the form and the aesthetics for that, rather than saying that it should change because of a pre-existing aesthetic predilection. That's our view. Yes?
It seems to me that a lot of these types of innovations in robotics and like though being involved in these adaptive devices and such are often spearheaded by computer scientists, and I was wondering how it was different to approach those issues as a designer.
That's a really good question. You should come to MIT. Carlo Ratti and I are having a debate on that very topic. I believe it is on November 10th. He being I suppose he being a computer scientist in part, and I being an architect, I suppose. I think that robotics, to be successful, have to be extremely simple. I like the floating Argo Array. It is an aquatic robot, but it essentially just comes up and down. I think the difficulty with moving architecture physically is that you can get caught up in a lot of mechanical gear ratio problems, which are of less interest to me, but might be interesting to someone who's programming that. I think about the artificial lobster robot, for example, that NASA is looking at, that has an interesting biological function of thrashing around really violently, which is what a threatened lobster would do just randomly. NASA's trying to look at that kind of frantic, unpredictable motion as a way of freeing up like lunar crawlers when they get stuck, So that's definitely a project for a computer scientist. That would not really interest me. What interests me is the kind of conflation of software, a soft attitude towards infrastructure, like you talked about in your first question, and sometimes even a soft materials as a kind of a radical embodiment of that. So it has to really make space. It has to be material, and I like to think that we have this kind of continuing project of trying in some way to reshape electrical infrastructure. Okay, guys, thanks. See some of you tomorrow. We'll have to watch it on the podcast when that's done. So, anyway, thanks for the invitation. And for the intro.